Fab competitive seasons come back to back to back to back. ProQuest season into Road to Nationals, which then goes into Skirmish. And then next, a battle harden's announced nearby that you want to attend and need to prep for, or maybe a calling. Heck, even at the local level, every single month, there's another new promo which to play for. It's very easy to feel that Fab never stops, and that there's always the next thing right around the corner. Today, I want to talk about no finish line fatigue in a competitive environment, such as Flesh and Blood, and how our personal expectations, goal setting, and managing our own success criteria can help to maintain both our mental fortitude and our continued enjoyment of the game.
A huge shout out to our channel members for supporting what we do here. If you want to get involved with the channel and the Dice Commando community, please consider joining as a channel member. Remember, these videos are only possible with your support. You can show that support with a like, a subscribe, and by leaving us a comment and sharing your feedback. Community first, and go Commando.
Hey there folks, and welcome back to Dice Commando for another Go Again cast. Thanks so much for tuning in. Your guys' continued support is truly amazing to me. Now, the timing of today's video is intentional to coincide with US Nationals weekend. Watching the global nationals events unfold has served to motivate myself as well as many other players across the world. And for those who showed up at these events and performed well, they probably are further motivated headed into Worlds. But there are others who perhaps did not achieve their goals or meet their own expectations, and who are now struggling with the next steps. Both these ups and these downs happen to us all, and it's how we approach the journey itself that determines our long-term enjoyment of what we're doing. Now, full disclaimer for tonight, I'm not a psychologist, nor do I claim to play one on the YouTubes. All we're doing tonight is sharing my personal thoughts and experiences that I've learned today in my life about motivating myself and others to complete their own goals. Obviously and clearly, if you're someone who's personally struggling with any issue, seeking professional is the correct answer. Tonight's video is merely sharing my own personal perspectives. Now, as we start tonight's cast, what I'd like to do is paint a picture. Many of you have maybe run a 5K, half marathon or more. Or maybe you're a biker out for a long ride, or perhaps you're a hiker. Perhaps you've done a road trip. In any cases, there are times where no matter your passion for what you're doing, you hit the, man, I just don't want to be doing this right now point anymore. For me and my running, this has happened to me several times. Once in the middle of the night, crossing the coast range on one of those big relays, I remember telling myself, running sucks, I'm not doing this anymore after this race. And it's happened to varying degrees in countless other less dramatic and lesser memorable times. I've even had races where 45 seconds after the gun goes off and you start to settle in, I hear that voice in the back of my head, why the F am I here? This is dumb, let's fake an injury. And that can make for a long, miserable, and disappointing race. And I'm sure in whatever your own example might be that you can relate to my situation. Something you love doing, something you find value in, and for whatever reason, you've hit a mental speed bump. It's quite common, and it happens to everyone. In these cases, you endure the thoughts of, this sucks, this is dumb, I want to quit, I'm never doing this again, right? But come the end of the race or the activity, when you cross that finish line, the feeling of accomplishment and the euphoria of completion sets in. And before you know it, you've completely turned a 180 to what you were saying in that race, and you've signed up for the next one. By now, you've probably ascertained that the finish line to which we're speaking tonight isn't a geographical location, but rather a mental checkpoint, if you will, along your journey. These checkpoints allow us to take a pause, evaluate where we're at, what's going well and what isn't, and make adjustments. And yes, take a bit of celebration in what we've accomplished. Having a finish line is not only necessary, but essential to continued joy in what we're doing. Now, sure, today we're going to be applying this conversation specifically to Flesh and Blood, but fundamentally, what we're talking about here can really be applied to anything in our lives. This is something that I not only see, but have experienced many times in my professional career as well. At times, Flesh and Blood can certainly feel like there is no finish line. As I mentioned in the intro, the events and the seasons come at a seemingly rapid fire. Every event, all the way down to armories, can often feel like cutthroat, punch you in the face, super competitive play. It can be a lot to endure week after week with seemingly no stopping point. And sure, looking at the method of progression to, say, Nationals or Worlds, sure, it makes complete sense why we wouldn't view things as small pieces. You play in an RTN to earn a spot to Nationals. You play in a ProQuest to get an invite to a Pro Tour, and so on, right? It makes sense how we would frame it that way. It's only natural. But it's important to recognize and pause at the milestones along the way of success. And to do that, it's about framing your goals in a manner that is reasonable. Instead of telling yourself, I'm going to top 8 at Nats, instead it's healthier to approach each step. What are the milestones that you need to hit to get there? Go to X, gem Y hours per week, top at Z. This allows you spots along the way where you can mentally say, I did it, and then take a mental break of sorts before you get right back into the grind. Or on the flip side, in the case where things are not going your way, a checkpoint to see where you're at, if goals need adjusted, or what changes need applied in order to move for success. Marathoners break up their race strategy into pieces. Instead of coming out in the morning and say, I'm going to run a sub-3 marathon, they break up their splits and their goals for specific places during that race. Not only does this force them to periodically reevaluate where they're at in the middle of the race, but it allows them to course correct, no pun intended, and apply changes as needed. Even in those cases of failure, having a finish line still provides that, sometimes in that case much more needed, break and reset. Having a bad, no good, awful battle-hardened event, say you're 5-2 on the day or worse and you just want to crawl in a hole and die. Maybe you're demoralized, upset at yourself, and frustrated. Hey, we've all been there. But then, that night, you go out with your team, your buddies, and you grab maybe one too many beers. Your celebration reaching the end of that accomplishment together. Some of you exceeded the expectations and some of you didn't. But what you're doing collectively is stopping, pausing, and taking a moment to acknowledge that, regardless of the outcome, you still made it. Because after all, those finish lines, they let us accept, acknowledge, and then move on past failure as well. And oftentimes, that's just as, if not more, important. Another extremely important piece of this entire puzzle is something that I used to talk about a lot here on the channel back in the day, but I kind of backed off during the early days of Flesh and Blood due to just the atmosphere in the community at the time. But the concept of knowing your success criteria is something that I'm very passionate about, and something I believe to be crucial to our long-term enjoyment of our games. Now, this concept is pretty simple. Your enjoyment of this game is going to be directly related to where you set your personal success criteria. Do you go to a large tournament and expect to win it? If so, you're far more likely to leave that tournament disappointed than the person who wanted to just show up and do their best. On the other hand, the guy at that tournament shooting to be better than 50%, he has a much more likely chance to leave there happy. The person looking to make prizing, more likely to have a more successful day, right? You may have placed higher than him, but if you're leaving disappointed because your goal was higher, right? Put that in perspective. Some people have a bad day if they don't win every game they play. Others are happy if they play their best and don't make any mistakes, walk away with new knowledge regardless of the outcome. Who do you think will have a better time from an enjoyment perspective at that tournament? And who likely will become a better player during the experience? Setting reasonable goals and accomplishable goals is a crucial step in your long-term plan. Now, let's not confuse this. It's not about telling ourselves that we can't do it. It's not about selling ourselves short, just so that we can feel good about it at the end. That's not what's happening here. But it's about recognizing that you could have done everything right, that you could have played your best and still lost. So if your goals are simply on the outcome, that's not necessarily the best success criteria. Sometimes, for any number of reasons, it just isn't in the cards, pun intended this time, to win. And it's not fair to yourself to expect yourself to win every time. The only real result in that case will be disappointment and loss of enjoyment. To bring us back to the running example, in the recent past, I was very competitive as a running team with my dog Turbo. Turbo, in his prime, was arguably the most decorated running dog in the northwest of the USA. When we started, I had no expectations. I was happy to be doing it and out there with him having fun. But as he started to learn and improve, and as we as a team became very good together, he started racking up the hardware. It became, after a while, that my expectation at these races was that Turbo and I would show up and have him be the first dog across the line. But no, it didn't happen every time. And yes, there were races where I was disappointed in how I'd run or how I'd set us up for success. But fortunately, I was able to never lose sight of our end goal, which was to log 100 miles of races before his retirement. That was our overall goal, and that's what we were working for, with the finish lines along the way. And this brings up another very important component to success criteria in how we approach and evolve our expectations of ourselves over time. Look, we all want to grow and improve. It's natural, it's healthy, and it's part of our own personal success. But again, we need to be reasonable in how we approach those. Letting our past successes set the bar for our future success criteria can be very dangerous. If you finally win your first armory, is it reasonable then to be disappointed when you don't win the armory the next week? I would say no, and I think many of you would as well. Certainly, if your new expectation is to win every armory you attend, you're going to leave a lot of armories pretty disappointed. So in closing, we all know that this game is hard. This game is competitive, and this game can be exhausting. This game requires too much concentration, too much skill, and too much thinking for you to possibly be consistently successful while in a bad headspace. So whether it be for your enjoyment or for your success in reaching your goals, it's important to embrace those small wins. As your enjoyment goes up, so does your motivation. It's so important not to think about a finish line as the end all, but rather as a checkpoint along the way. And if the day comes when you hit a finish line and you find that you're no longer finding joy in what you're doing, then that's a problem and it's time to change something about it. Stay healthy, stay strong, thanks for being you, and go Commando.